Labor leader Anthony Albanese says an Indigenous voice to Parliament is essential to achieve reconciliation. The opposition leader has spoken at the Garma Festival, telling Indigenous Australians they have been patient long enough. Matt Cunningham joins us now live from the festival. Matt, Anthony Albanese wants the government to consider the constitutional change.
That's right, Danica. Anthony Albanese says that an Indigenous voice to Parliament should be enshrined in the Constitution. Of course, this has been at the heart of this debate about constitutional recognition. We know that in 2017, the Uluru Statement from the Heart that followed years of consultation came up with that recommendation that an Indigenous voice to the Parliament be enshrined in the Constitution. Now, this has been debated for several days here at the Garma Festival. We've heard the Indigenous Affairs Minister, Ken Wyatt, say that he doesn't believe that, or he doesn't want to support something that's not going to pass at a referendum. But Anthony Albanese was unequivocal today in his support for that Indigenous voice to Parliament. He said that Aboriginal people in this country had waited too long for this type of recognition. He pointed to the fact that it had been 30 years since Paul Keating's Redfern speech, that it had been more than 50 years since Gough Whitlam had poured a handful of sand through the fingers of Vincent Lingiari, and more than 60 years since Vincent Lingiari and his fellow colleagues had walked off at Wave Hill. So Anthony Albanese says that the time is now, and basically says that this needs to be done because in the spirit of the Australian fair go, it's the right thing to do. Here's a bit of Anthony Albanese's speech.
I want a voice and truth and then treaty to be part of our nation's journey, part of our national life. And as I've said before, it's not just about respect and redress. It's about progress and change. It's about moving out of the darkness and into the light. It would be the ultimate fulfilment of that most Australian of instincts, the fair go. More than anything, it would be right.
Anthony Albanese also had some light-hearted moments in his speech, Danica. He talked about Barnaby Joyce. Of course, we know that Barnaby Joyce, not long after the Uluru Statement from the Heart was handed down, came out and described this idea of a voice to Parliament as a third chamber and expressed his opposition to the voice to Parliament. Well, we know that last week he came out and said that he was actually wrong to have said that. And Anthony Albanese praised Barnaby Joyce for the fact that he'd been willing to listen to people, to understand exactly what was being proposed with a voice to Parliament, and to say that he was wrong. Now, we know that the federal government, the Prime Minister, has ruled out enshrining the Indigenous voice to Parliament in the Constitution, but is still pushing forward with constitutional recognition. The government says it wants to hold a referendum in this term of government. It's going to be interesting to see, Danica, what happens if a question is put to the Australian public about constitutional recognition, but if an Indigenous voice to Parliament is not included in that, and whether a lot of the people who really have been pushing for constitutional recognition will still support that push if it doesn't include that Indigenous voice.
And Matt, a prominent Indigenous leader is taking on mining companies in a native title claim. Take us through it.
Yeah, this is very interesting, Danica. Galarrwuy Yunupingu spoke today at the Garma Festival. He's not actually taking on the mining companies themselves, but it's their actions that is basically leading to this claim. He's actually going to take on the Commonwealth Government for the fact that it allowed those mining companies here in northeast Arnhem Land on Gumatj country in the 1960s to start those mining operations. Now, this is going to be a fascinating native title compensation case. I'm told it could be one of the biggest this country has ever seen. Here's Galarrwuy Yunupingu explaining how he was planning to take this legal action at the Garma Festival today.
They have damaged our country without seeking advice to us, and they have damaged a whole lot of dreamings, and dreamings that were important to Aboriginal people.
Danica, this claim follows an historic decision in the High Court earlier this year in the Timber Creek case. In that case, the High Court upheld a federal court decision that had awarded $2.5 million in compensation to traditional owners in Timber Creek, not just for the physical harm caused, but for the spiritual harm caused as well, when their land was destroyed to build infrastructure there. Now, in this case, you've got to consider the fact that we're talking about a much bigger parcel of land, and we're talking about the fact that they've actually dug up a lot of that country and built a mining operation here. Now, one of the things in the Timber Creek case was that spiritual harm. They were able to claim that because traditional owners were able to tell the court of the gut-wrenching pain they felt when they saw some of their sacred sites destroyed. Now, interesting that Galarrwuy Yunupingu in his speech today also talked about the pain he felt when sacred sites, including rocks and trees here on Gulmutch land, were destroyed when those mining operations began in the 1960s. Here's Galarrwuy Yunupingu speaking about that.
One of the important area was a rock where they fired the rock and blew it out and took the rocks away in pieces. And that was a very important rock which claimed the country, Gallipoli.
Danica, that Timber Creek claim was for $2.5 million. I'm told that this claim that's being launched here by the Gulmutch in northeast Arnhem Land could run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. It's going to be fascinating to watch where this case goes. Galarrwuy Yunupingu says he expects it to be before the courts within a couple of months.